is Friday, February 9th, 2018. My name is Judy Herrera, and I'm in Camarillo, California. It is my honor and pleasure to interview Mel Krone on behalf of the Conejo Valley chapter of the DAR and Colonial Dames 17th Century for the Veterans History Project with the Library of Congress. This interview is being recorded by Ed Lynch from Advanta Videography and contains the reflections and memories of the veteran during his time in the Marines. This is Mel's story. Mel, you were the oldest born to Melvin Clarence and Emma Krone in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You had a younger brother, Richard, and grew up in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania. In high school, you were quite the Renaissance man, participating in such diverse interests such as chorus, wrestling, play production, track, National Honor Society president, football, play production, the Latin Club, and spelunking. You were college-bound when an overzealous assistant principal made an example of you your senior year, had you expelled for truancy when you took your girlfriend home who wasn't feeling well. But things worked out for the best when you picked up a hitchhiker later that year. Do you want to pick up your story there?
Yeah, I was pretty much all set to go to college, and Mr. Johnson totally changed my plans in doing that. So I've been working at a gas station pumping gas at 30 cents a gallon, and the guy who was half owner of the gas station also had a tool and die company. So he hired me up there, and I learned to cut my fingers different ways, and was going home from work one night. We had moved out into the country about 8 miles, and there was a guy in uniform hitchhiking. And that was the time when, I had hitchhiked the whole way across the United States sometimes when I got in the service, and people used to do that. And so I stopped and picked him up, and we were talking, and on the way to drop him off, I dropped him off, and he invited me in, and he's in a Marine uniform, which I knew a few people in the Marines, but not that much about them. And would you like a beer? I was 17, sure. So we had a beer, and we talked, and probably 2 hours later, he drove behind me out to my parents so that they could sign my enlistment papers to join the Marine Corps. You know, at 17, you had to have your parents still sign for you. And sometime later, I was on a train headed for Paris Island, and totally changed my life.
Oh, okay.
And it was probably one of the better things that I have ever done.
So what was boot camp like for you there?
But this was about a year after the Ribbon Creek incident, where a drill instructor had taken some of the Marines out, and a few of them didn't swim very well and paid the consequence for that. And things had not really changed much. The Marine Corps, like they say, they make men out of you. They strip you down to the basics, from the haircut. They teach you discipline, leadership, all these sort of things. And I had been somewhat involved with scouting for about 2 years. My dad had a heart attack. Mom said we had to drop out of scouting, too much to do, and he recovered. And about a year later, they started a Severe Patrol Squadron, and I was in that for about 2 years. And I learned how to drill and this, that, and the other thing. So I had sort of a step up in boot camp. So I was one of the 3 squad leaders, and that was a good deal in a way, except that anybody that screwed up, the squad leader was sort of the one the drill instructor disciplined. And I think they still do it today. But they never did anything that either myself or the other people they didn't deserve. They just tried to get you in line and make Marines out of you, and I think they did a good job of it.
Good. And then where did you go after that?
I graduated on Marine Corps birthday, November 10th, 1959. Got in a bus, and we went up to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, for infantry training. Went through the infantry training, finished that up, and went home for Christmas on my boot leave. And from there, I had orders up to Great Lakes, Illinois. The Navy had an electronics training school up there, and I was supposed to become an electronics technician or something. I was in casual company for about a month, waiting on a date for the school to start, and they canceled the school. And says, you have your choice. There's another class out in Treasure Island, California. Treasure Island, California. It didn't sound good to me. Or you can go back to Camp Lejeune. So that was on the East Coast. I was familiar with the East Coast. So I went back to Camp Lejeune. And we got down there. There were probably a dozen of us. And we arrived back at Camp Lejeune as a group. And they didn't know what to do with us. So they sent us over to a place called Montfort Point, and we went through wireman school. I became a pole climber.
Oh.
And
What's a pole climber?
we put in communication systems for telephone lines and stuff. That was the day before the cell phones.
Right.
Yeah, we had WE8s, the hand cranked phones and stuff like that. And I did that for, oh gosh, probably until about September of 1960. And 3 of us got orders up to Marine Barracks, Washington, D.C. And as phone operators, we were going to work the switchboard up there, which is great, but you get involved with everything else that they do. They have the Marine Corps Silent Drill Team up there, and they put on Sunset Parade every week, and you get involved in that. A number of funerals over in Arlington Cemetery, and street cordons where you'd stand out there with your rifle. Nobody ever checked to see if it was loaded back in those days.
Huh.
I mean, you actually carried your rifle out and stood at attention and present arms when the president and whoever he was visiting him drove past. And that was it was totally different than it is today. I mean, I can remember I would take the trolley up to the mall and actually go in and look at Congress in action. I mean, you didn't have to go through any screening. Totally different world back then. And it was an interesting place. I think in about March of 1961, I took a test for the Naval Enlisted Scientific Education Program. The Navy was looking to get about 200 engineers. They were short of engineers, and they offered the Marine Corps 25 billets, and I managed to pass the test, and next thing I know, I went to Bainbridge, Maryland for a 2-month preparatory course in order to go to college, and passed that. And next thing I know, in September of '61, I was attending Penn State University, and spent 4 years up there on active duty, got a degree, and that was just totally different, to be paid to go to college.
That's awesome.
So I guess I could tell you about one of the better events up there.
I think you should.
It must have been 1962, had to be 1962, that the Marine Corps Ball was coming up. And one of the other Marines, his wife was working at someplace, and he says, hey, she knows a girl out there, it'd be a good date for you for the Marine Corps birthday. So gave me her name and where she worked, and I went out and tracked her down, and oh my goodness, she was great. And she went to the ball with me, and one thing led to another. We got engaged the following February and decided we'd get married. And that was 54 years ago.
That's
Been with
awesome.
me ever since. That's really cool.
It is cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That was one of the better things out of school. So, going to college, we'd wear a uniform once a week, and nobody cared. I mean, we were in the service, and totally different than what I understand the attitude is in many of the colleges today. We were there for an education, and as much as we can learn, we did. It was Penn State's on a semester or a quarter system, and we could have graduated in 3 years. They had a set schedule for us to attend. And of course, those of us, there were only 5 or 6 Marines going to this thing, and we were attached to the ROTC unit.
Okay.
And we were smart enough that why would I want to graduate in 3 years? This is a 4-year thing. And so we'd drop one of the required courses and take something we felt like taking, like management or political science or something that had nothing to do with electrical engineering. So I ended up graduating in September '65, was commissioned, and we had bought a 57-foot house trailer, and we moved that down to Quantico and went through the 6-month basic course down there. Every officer goes through the basic school, and they learn how to become an officer. It's an outstanding thing that they do. It's the Marine Corps simplified and short-term version of going to West Point or Annapolis just for
Okay.
Marines. And
So when you came out of college, you came out as a second lieutenant?
I came out as
Okay.
a second lieutenant.
Okay.
Yep. Totally different. Yeah. Totally different life. I mean, you walk past and people were saluting. It's like, ooh. In fact, later on, I got to tell you a story, diverse a little. When I was going through Naval Flight Officer training, once I'd been designated as a Naval Flight Officer, we went up to Glencoe, Georgia, and flew in the T-39 for about 6 weeks. And as we checked in, there was about 4 or 5 of us, Marines, and the rest were all sailors up there. And we went down to 2-story barracks. Marine headquarters that we had to check into was on the bottom floor of the thing. So we were walking down, and we turned the corner, and we're walking up. It's a pretty big barracks, and there's a bunch of enlisted people sitting on the steps out there. And as we walk up, we hear this "10 what?" and we stand at attention. They're raising to salute us. It was, we weren't used to that. Still not used to it. A lot of times down in Pensacola, if you were walking down in uniform and here comes a Navy guy, he would cross the street rather than combine. Wholly different attitude of things. But went out of the basic school probably the last week or so there. Headquarters Marine Corps set down the people who handle assignments, and we get interviewed, who are you, what do you want to do? So I'm talking to the guy, and what do you want to do? And I says, well, you sent me to college, I have a degree in electrical engineering, I'd probably want to go into some sort of electronics. We have artillery, tanks, or infantry. I said, you don't understand. I'm an electrical engineer now. You wanted an engineer, I think. I think I'd like to go into electronics. Artillery, tanks, or infantry. So I said, I'll tell you what, I think I'll go to Pensacola. So went down to Pensacola to become a pilot. And first thing you do is get another physical. And the guy says, you're not seeing as well as you used to. So my eyes were down to 20/30, I guess. So he says they have a Naval Flight Officer program. So I said, oh, I'll do the Naval Flight Officer. So I went out. At that time, it was called Basic Naval Aviation Officer School. While later on, they changed it to Naval Flight Officer. But went through that. Finished that course sometime in September, probably. I have to think of the year, and it confused me. But went from there up to Glencoe. Went through radar intercept officer training to learn how to fly intercepts, and then went up to Beaufort, South Carolina, and joined VMFA 251. And you'd asked before, VMFA, that's Marine Fighter Attack Squadron. They were flying the McDonnell Douglas F-4B at that time. It was a high-altitude interceptor. It was designated as a fighter. When Vietnam started, it turned into a fighter bomber, but whole different thing up there. But you go through a syllabus where you learn to do navigation and any sort of thing associated with flying, but fundamentally you go out and fly intercepts against other airplanes. You're a fighter looking for enemy fighters to shoot down and destroy. And
So the pilot would be in front and you would be sitting
in the back.
and behind it. So
Yeah.
just the two of you in the cockpit?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we couldn't put a third person in
No.
there if we tried.
Small.
No, it was just the two of us. And the pilot flew it. I handled essentially navigation, communication, and worked the radar, and gave him directive commentary to put the airplane in a position where he could fire a missile and be successful in destroying the enemy. And that was my job. And in fact, I think we had a little discussion. When they first got the F-4, it was a high-altitude interceptor. The Russians had a high-altitude threat that they wanted to counter. So about every 10th NFO that went through training up there got trained. I actually was fitted and was given a spacesuit, a helmet, the whole bit. Went through a whole high altitude. The F-4's limited service ceiling of 50,000 feet, and we would fly it up to 65,000 feet. It would actually point it up. It would flame out probably around 60,000 feet, would top out about 65, turn over and head back down, and hopefully it'd shoot our missile if somebody was up there, and get the engines relit and fly back. But it was a pre-astronaut thing. Later on, way later on, before I retired, I actually applied when I was in VX4 for an astronaut twice, got good recommendations, but man, there's 400 or 500 people apply for it. But the squadron I was in, 3 of the people there that year were selected for astronaut.
Wow.
John McBride, Dale Leesman, and Dave Gardner. All 3 of them became astronauts, which just sort of, I wish I would have been. That'd been a total different life. But finished my training there. Got orders to go overseas to Vietnam. I arrived over there in July of 1967 and flew into Da Nang, got transported down to Chu Lai, and there were 3 Marine fighter attack squadrons down there, and I joined VMFA 542, best squadron ever in the Marine Corps. And just to give you the type of squadron, in that squadron, later on I found out the Marine Corps typically has something in the order of 60 general officers, from brigadier up through general. And out of that 60, you'd estimate less than half of them were aviators. So let's give you the number of 30 aviators. Half them were probably rotary wing. They flew helicopters. The rest were fixed wing. Out of 15 fixed wing Marine Corps generals, 6 were in that squadron made general officers. So they had just a super squadron. It was neat. And got set up, and we flew that first tour. I'd say most of our missions were close air support. We'd have 1-2 missions a day. Occasionally we would fly at night. Night was terrible. We'd try to C-130 flying up overhead and dropping flares, and you're in mountainous terrain with flares, and you don't know what. It was hair-raising. Okay. Oh, gosh. But close air support was what we did mostly. We had what we called snake eye bombs. You'd drop them. It had fins that would pop out. It would drop at low altitude, 200 or 300 feet. They'd drop right into where you wanted them to hit. Or we had napalm, and I guess napalm was very effective, but wasn't a nice thing.
So mostly you were supporting the troops on the ground.
Troops on the ground.
They would call in for support, air support.
We'd have close air support rendezvous points. We'd go up and they'd stack airplanes. Maybe it would be a flight of 2 or a flight of 4, depending on what they had fragged for us. And we'd go up and we'd orbit at a certain altitude, and there'd be a forward air controller. And as he'd use up a flight, then he'd call the next flight down. They'd make contact with him. You go and rendezvous with him, and he'd go down, and typically they would shoot white phosphorus missiles. And at the target they wanted you to hit, and you'd acknowledge their target, and depending on if you're close air support, you were down at 5,000 feet, and you'd roll in and get down right on the ground. Or if it was a heavily defended area, would stay up at 10,000 feet and would do 30 or 40 degree dives and drop bombs. You didn't drop napalm on that, but that was the one. If it was a truck park or something that they wanted to try and defend, that was the one where they'd shoot AAA at you, 20 to 85 millimeter AAA. The ones where it did most of the close air support, every time you flew down there, somebody was shooting at you. And most of the time, if you're lucky, you never knew it. You'd go home and the plane would come up and say, "Hey, you got 2 holes in your wing," or something like that. But that was just life.
Yeah. How did you keep in touch with family while you were over there? Before cell phones, so.
Your mail was free over there. Would write just about every day. I'd send Chris a letter. They had the little box tapes. Every once in a while, we had tape recorders, and the first tour, the two kids should make tapes of them. And it wasn't a day like today. You're watching. They're sitting there watching each other on their mini computers. That'd be incredible then.
Yeah.
But very slow in getting any news from home or telling her anything. And it was essentially the same letter. Every day was a routine type thing. You get up in the morning, maybe go to breakfast, go up, see what the frag was or what you was on the schedule for, and you'd fly 1 or 2 missions a day. Or if you didn't have anything to do, you had a collateral duty. I'd work in admin doing nothing and just waiting. And you get your mission, you'd suit up for it and go flag, come back, have dinner again, and go to the club at night. Drank a few beers over there, I think. Learned to sing some hateful songs that we can't even talk about.
So you put in your year, and then what did you do? Where were you stationed after Vietnam?
Before you go there, how many missions did you fly?
First tour I flew 220 missions.
Yeah.
And they weren't all close air support. If the weather was bad, we'd have what was called TPQs. You'd take off, you'd fly up 20,000 feet, talk to the controller up there. He'd give you an assigned altitude, assigned location, and then you fly at a certain heading at a certain airspeed, and they would stand by, mark, and you'd drop your bombs, and they had it all calibrated so that occasionally you'd hit in the same country that you were flying over.
Oh, gosh.
I don't know. It was, we used to call it trees in the open. You'd never know if it did any good or not, but it was better to drop the bombs and to fly back in bad weather and try and land with them. So did that at night, and we did that in bad weather.
Okay.
The whole time I was there, I'd say out of 220 missions, we flew probably 10 of them up north, and they were all direct air support. They had something up there that they wanted us to go bomb.
Okay.
And occasionally we get up there the first tour, and they would want us to escort the B-52s. The B-52s at that time, I don't think ever flew north of the DMZ. And B-52s, they're a funny group of people. They did not want us closer than a half mile to their airplanes. We had to fly big orbits around them. We were MiG air support. We were keeping the MiGs from coming down and shooting one of them down. But they didn't want us near them, and we didn't want near them. They'd send 2 or 3 in doing these arc lights where they would just drop hundreds of bombs up around the DMZ. And that was not a very exciting mission. Look, I'll explain later rather than hit it, but my second tour, when we were up at Hanoi or Haiphong and the B-52s were there, they wanted us under their wing. Whole different attitude of people then. It was different.
Yeah. Yeah, because this is early 67, 68. Okay, so you did your year, and it's August 68, and you're stateside. And then
I'm glad you remember the months. That helps me a lot. Yeah, 68 I came back. I had orders to Pensacola, Florida. Went back down to Pensacola, went out to, it was still the basic Naval Flight Officer training thing. They changed it to VT-10 while I was there. They changed our wings and did a lot of things. But I checked in, and they assigned me to tech. That was sort of interesting as an aside. When I checked in, a guy named Lee Hawkins was the instructor. He kept all the instructors together. He was sort of our liaison with the squadron. And he says, "What's your lineal number?" And I says, "Lineal number? What's?" He says, "Well, date of promotion and stuff," which was sort of cool. When I joined, I was a second lieutenant. Made first lieutenant before I went to Vietnam, and to make captain, I made first lieutenant in March of '67. I made captain in October of '67.
Wow.
You know, that's March is the third month, the 10th month. That's 7 months it took me to make captain because there was a shortage of officers. It's typically 3.5 to 4 years
I know.
to make captain. That was different. But I had no idea what my lineal number was. So he says, he looks it up and he says, "Oh, whatever you are, here's your parking spot," which is about 8 rows back. You know, I was a junior officer there. And it was fine, didn't know anything. But this was 2 or 3 Marines there. The rest were all Navy people as instructors, teaching naval flight officers whatever they needed to know. And checked into the tech section, and we taught radar and computers. First of all, you took a little bit of electronics, just enough to make you dangerous, and then radar and computers. And the guy there that was in charge of tech, he was getting ready to leave, and talked to Lee Hawkins, the admin officer for us. He says, "You're an electrical engineer, aren't you?" He says, "Yeah." And he says, "Let's see how you do here." So Dave Thompson, the guy that was leaving, he was going to be there for about 3 weeks. So I started instructing. And next thing I know, he calls me down and he says, "Hey, we had somebody else assigned to take over his job at Tech." He says, "But you've been teaching the other instructors how to teach what they're teaching," because we had history majors and geography majors, and they were teaching radar and computers and knew nothing about it except what was in the book, which is terrible. So next thing I know, he says, "I'm going to make you head of Tech." And he says, "Here's your new parking spot," which was cool. To me, that was an advantage. So I moved up to the first row, and that was worth it. But it was an interesting job doing that. And we'd get 2 or 3 flights. They had a UC-45J, which is a big 2-engine thing. We could put 4 or 5 students in just to do navigation, teaching them fundamentals of just flying. And that's also when I got my first carrier landings. All the Navy instructors there, it's, "How many traps you got?" It's like, Marine Corps hasn't been out in a carrier since Vietnam. So I went over, VT4 was the carrier squadron down in Pensacola, and I knew a couple guys that had been in 542. So I says, "How about take me out on the Lexington," which is an old carrier that was off the coast of Florida, and went out and got a couple dozen traps in the Lexington so I could, I got a couple. Yeah, that was, you had to do that to be in the Navy squadron.
Oh, yeah.
But did that and came down with orders for me to go up to Naval or to Marine Corps Amphibious Warfare School, college, whatever they call it. It's our junior school. And when did I tell you I went to that?
November 69.
November 69, yeah. It all runs together there.
Yeah, and nuclear warfare training.
Yeah,
as well?
that was probably a 6-month course at junior school, and then another month course at nuclear weapons delivery. The F4 did not have nuclear weapons. They just wanted somebody to be familiar with them in case they ever needed to do that. And that was sort of an interesting. The neat thing about that, you talk about security, that was highly classified back then. Electromagnetic pulse was something that was very classified back then that nobody knew about and you couldn't talk about. That they blow this thing up and it destroys all the computers within its radius of exposure, I guess. And that class, they had a guy sitting out, a Marine sitting out. You had to take your ID card out and hand him your ID card. He'd look at it, look at you, and let you go into the class. Anytime you went to the head, if you went to lunch, every time you went in and out of that for a month, he'd check your ID card. It's like, same guy.
Yeah.
I'm the same guy, but that's just the way the game is played.
Yeah.
And the way security in the last 2 or 3 years back in Washington, D.C., one wonders what happened to all the security regulations, because I learned to comply with security, and if you didn't comply, you paid the consequences one way or the other. But
Yeah.
that's a whole different story.
Okay, then it's September 70 and you get transferred to Yuma, Arizona.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you, oh, my wife is so excited about that. Oh, we're going out to Yuma. And then the longer we drove across the desert, the more dismal things seemed to be. But I used to collect coins on. That was a neat thing, just as an aside, that we stopped in Colorado. I wanted to go up and see the mint. And we had the kids in a hotel with us, and we were heading to Yuma, hot and everything else. And we're in a motel, and our daughter Kathy wakes up in the morning and says, opens the curtains and says, it's white outside. It had snowed about 6 inches.
Oh my gosh.
And nobody had any coats or sweaters, but we got by that. And I got to see the Denver Mint. That was sort of cool.
Oh, yeah. Good.
And as an aside from that, driving down to Yuma, we had a Ford, whatever it was. It had seats that sat in the back that you face rear, whatever the Ford was in that year. But that's what we had, and so much stuff in it. And then we had the 2 kids, and our son Michael was born while we were at Quantico, and Kathy had been born before at Paris Island, so we had 2 Marine kids. But we also had the cat he was in the car, and I guess it had automatic windows, and we almost cut the cat's head off one day. It had its head sticking out. But going in and out of a parking lot somewhere, I must have scraped because I lost my license plate. And somewhere in New Mexico and again in Arizona, I got stopped twice by the highway patrol because I didn't have a license plate on. Okay? And I knew that I didn't have a license plate. They're going to stop me. So I got to Yuma and checked into the VMFAT 101, which was the F4 training squadron. And one of the first things they did was send me back up to the F4 radar school up in El Toro.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to go back there. It was only a 3 or 4 day course, but I knew some people up there and went to visit them and had a few drinks, only a few. And I'm driving back to El Toro to spend the night in the BOQ, and it's probably 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. And as I'm driving somewhere down in Orange County, all of a sudden the lights come on behind me. And I saw the license plate. So I pull over and I stop and I reach over the glove compartment to get my registration and license. And I hear this, "Don't move." And I was like, whoa, what? And I get out of the car and I get out and these 2 guys come walking up. Well, they thought I was going for a gun or something. And they told me afterwards, they almost shot me. But as they come up and they look at me and says, "You're Captain Krone, aren't you?" One of the guys was one of the mechanics. He joined the police force in Orange County, and things were okay.
Oh, good. Gosh.
Neat aside, that's one of the things I remember about that. It made a lasting impression on me not to go to the glove compartment when they stopped you.
Well, you made a lasting impression on that officer. He remembered you. So you were, how long were you in Yuma, stationed in Yuma?
I was at Yuma there until I went back to Vietnam.
Okay, so you want to pick up then with going back to your second tour of duty?
Yeah, well, the tour at 101, that was sort of just taking brand new students up to teach them how to fly. They would fly with a pilot in the front seat. Their first flight, they would be in the back seat just to see how the airplane felt. And the F4 is an amazing airplane. Just aside, when I was going to college, I started skydiving, of all things. And I went up to the World Parachute Meet in 1962, took leave to go up. It was the first time they had the World Parachute Meet in the United States. A Marine Reserve major named Jacques Istel had started a skydiving place up in Massachusetts called Orange, and that's where they were having it. So I took leave and went up, and they made me the driver for the American team, and they had just had Volkswagen buses. They had just come out. So I drove the American team around the whole time I was up there, which was sort of a cool thing. Went back to college, and I jump occasionally. It was expensive, but I knew a few people that were doing it. And I ran into an Army captain that the Army he's a West Point graduate. They'd sent him up to Penn State to get his master's degree. He got it, and they sent him on to get his doctorate. And there's an airport near Penn State. He was going out every Sunday and making 2 or 3 jumps just to draw a crowd to take airplane rides. So he invited me to come with me. So I was getting 2 or 3 jumps in a weekend. And then a gunny up at the ROTC found out I was skydiving, and he said, you can't do that anymore. So I had to quit doing it. But the point when we'd do a 60-second delay from 12,000 feet, we'd go up to about 14,000 because of the altitude where we were jumping. And you could get a 60-second free fall then. And it would take you 25 minutes to get up to 14,000 feet. My first F4 ride, there was a guy named Jake Albright, never forget his name, took me on the first one out of Buford. And we go out there, we call for takeoff, and he hit full afterburner. And I'd say in a minute and a half, we were passing 30,000 feet. It was just, it was a rocket.
Wow.
That's one of the first impressions that I'll never forget. Anyway, they gave me orders back over to Japan. Before I left, I went over there in March, so it was probably about December. One of the guys I had gone through training in 251 with, he had been in 542, his name's Vic Rosillo. He was in the squadron heading back over to Japan. Marines had been out of Vietnam for about a year, and he was going to Japan. So we went out to his going away party out in Yuma, and right across the street, he says, there's a last model homes over there. It's the last one for sale. And his wife Phyllis and Chris had known each other, so we went over and looked at it, and that same night I signed a bill of sale. We bought the house. And it was cool because she stayed, and she knew Phyllis, and I knew Vic very well. So that was sort of, I liked doing that. But got over to Japan, checked into Iwakuni, and they sent me down. They had just finished a brand new bachelor officer quarters. It was a 2-story modular trailer type complex. They had probably, 10 long, 2 on each side, and 2 stories high. And I literally went into my room and peeled the cellophane off my furniture. I mean, it was all brand new. Hung stuff up in the closet. And then both squadrons were deployed. 115 was down in Okinawa, and 232 was down in the Philippines. So it was going to take me a while to go check in with group and get orders, and they'd fly me down to Okinawa. But we have ways to get around that. So I went over and found somebody in the C-130 squadron that I knew, and they let me sit up front, and they flew me down to Okinawa the next day. And I saw Vic, and he put me, he was the assistant ops officer. He put me on a squadron for a 4-plane the next morning. So we get up at dark 30, and we brief for it, and suited up, called for taxi, and taxied out, called for takeoff, and 2 of us went out and on the runway, and he says, squadron advises you to taxi back and shut down. So we taxied back and shut down, and we had read in the Stars and Stripes that things were acting up in Vietnam, and the Vietnamese had crossed the DMZ, and they were starting a mess over there. And long story short, by 6 o'clock that night, the entire squadron was back in Da Nang. We packed up and moved out. And I told you the other day, the not so funny thing about that, our sister squadron, the ones that were down in the Philippines, they had 1 airplane that was up in Iwakuni, and they told us, I was in the 4-plane that was going to be the first 4 heading back to Da Nang. Just wait and launch. This guy will refuel, and he'll fly in with you down to the Philippines and then go in with his squadron. So we waited, and he landed, refueled. He briefed him that we're heading to the Philippines. He's number 5, and it was probably 1,200 foot overcast. I have no idea how high, but a low overcast, and to get 5 airplanes up and stay under the overcast and circle around till everybody joins up and then pop up through it up above and head for the Philippines. We rendezvoused, the 4 of us got rendezvoused, and as he was rendezvousing, he flew low enough, he flew into the water and they were killed. And we just popped up and kept on going, and it was just a terrible start for something like that. So that's made an impression.
Sorry. Yeah.
But we landed, it took 2 or 3 days. The Air Force came in and gave us a briefing what we'd do. We'd moved up into Da Nang from Chu Lai, my first tour, for the last couple months, and we had air-conditioned Quonset huts.
Oh,
Air-conditioned.
I know. Changed from your first tour.
Well, this was first tour was air-conditioned
Oh, okay.
Quonset huts.
Okay.
The second tour, we're not there yet, but first tour was air conditioning, and everybody says, "You got air conditioning," and it says, I didn't argue with them, but it was one of those things that if you're flying a multi-million-dollar airplane and you fall asleep, things happen, and they wanted to make sure you got adequate rest because we're flying 24/7, and they tried to watch out for that. Flight surgeons were always, you getting enough rest, this, that, and the other thing. So we had to suffer through the air conditioning. It was a tough job, but that whole you had to say something about what did you do. You had an admin job, but at night you went over to the club and they showed movies, and you'd have a few beers, and the squadrons with just the fellowship of the officers there was, you made lifelong friendships. It was incredible. You still get together every once in a while. You still maintain contact with everybody, because if you do something like that together, you're bonded for life. But coming back into Da Nang, the second time they had a long, just like we had in Japan, only a single story. It was probably 8 units long, 2 rooms on either side, or room on either side of a hallway, and they put 2 guys in each room now. And Vic and I shared a room with him. We were in the one corner room, and 2 stories about that. About the third night there was a 122 rocket attack, and it hit close to us and actually penetrated a couple places in our room. So this was just a piece of thin metal and some sort of insulation, so there was no protection at all. We went down to the salvage yard where they had Marston matting, this piece of aluminum about that wide, and it's, 12 foot long. Took a Jeep, we put 2 of those in it, and we brought it back and stuck it on the 2 sides that were exposed to the outside, got some blocks and raised our bunks up so that as soon as the siren went off, there's going to be a rocket attack or something, would roll out of bed and crawl into the bed, and we were protected now. And 2 days later, everybody in the barracks had gone down and got it. That was the thing to do. Yeah. That kept us safer, I think.
Good. And then when did you, how did you get to Thailand?
Well, the politics of it was that we had to withdraw the number of troops. So President Nixon at that time decided it would be best that I'll pull the air wings out and send them over to Thailand. Well, there's only 3 or 4 Air Force bases over there that they were saturated, they were full. So they found this place called Nampong. It was a 10,000 foot strip that they used as a U-2 divert base over someplace in the middle of Thailand. So that was where they sent us. And we flew over. They had 4 hangars, 2-story hangars, that each of the F-4, there were 2 F-4 squadrons went over, and an A-6 squadron flew in. And we each had a hangar. The second story of each of those hangars, the enlisted troops were in there, just solid racks, and that was their housing for a couple of months. But it got them out of the rain. It rained frequently in Thailand, and it was hot. But we got over there and set up shop, and we started flying out of Thailand. And flying out of Thailand, we had to refuel going to Vietnam. would refuel before we got into Laos, crossing Laos into Vietnam, and they brought four C-130s down and from Okinawa, and they supported the whole operation down there. We never missed a beat. I mean, those guys, we thought this will never work, and it worked all the time. Would join on, refuel, drop our bombs, do whatever they wanted to do, and refuel, come rearm and Da Nang and stuff, and have a second mission, and then fly back to Nampang. And Nampang was, there's good and bad things about it. I think I told you, there was no status of force agreement in Thailand at that time, so the Thais had free access to the base, and they had villages all around the base, and it just crisscrossed the base. On one side of the runway, the special forces were training Laotians, infantry, to help this Vietnamese fight, and they had a grenade range and a rifle range and all these ranges on the one side. So it was just a 10,000-foot strip, and you could pull out there for takeoff sometimes, and you could feel sometimes the concussion of the explosions actually rock the airplanes. No shrapnel or anything, but it just the blast. That was. And then you'd watch every once in a while they'd bring some C-123s, which is a much smaller version of a C-130. Down, and it'd haul Laotians out, and you'd see a group of about 100 of them, and you wonder how they're going to put all those people in a C-123. Well, there were no seats; they'd just put them in, they'd stand up, close the door, and take off. I mean, it was moving mass humanity. That's the way they did it. But it was interesting flying out of there. I'll tell you another story now. It just came through there that when they started linebacker in late November, December of 1967, started flying up north with the B-52s, they were shooting them down. We lost a lot of B-52s up there and crews and everything else. But one night there was a B-52, and I guess he had like 5 of his engines out. They have 8 engines. And I think they have 8. They better have 8. But I think he was missing 5 of them. And he was coming down, and Nampang was about 40 miles south of Udorn, which is an Air Force base. And they called for Udorn to, emergency, we want to land there. And they says, hey, we're still recovering F-4s. We only have one runway. If something happens, the F-4s are, we can't land you here. Go just jump out of it. And he says, or you might try Nampang. They're 40 miles south. So Nampang Tower is B-52, whatever. We have an emergency. He says, Roger, report 3 miles with the gear. And they landed, and we went out the next day, and there's this B-52 sitting between the runway and the taxiway. There's little strips every 1,000, 2,000 feet, and he's stuck in between these. And they had 141s flying in from Guam or someplace bringing engines in. I mean, they had him fixed and out of there in 2 days. It was amazing.
Gosh.
But my experience, anytime on a cross country where they had B-52s, the security was just incredible. They had 2 or 3 sentries around every B-52 with dogs and all this. So you couldn't get near a B-52. The Navy and the Marine Corps have this thing, if a Navy airplane couldn't get back to the ship, and he would land at Da Nang or Chu Lai. When he left to go back, he'd have squadron markings from all the residents, Marine Corps squadrons, all over his airplane. You'd repaint his airplane almost if you would. And the same thing happened to us. If you landed in a Navy thing, they would help you out with marking your airplane. This B-52s, I have a big picture of it I took. There's a 15-foot gold Marine Corps emblem painted on both sides of the nose of that B-52. Nobody said a word. And someday, I haven't done it yet, I'll send it in the Air Force and ask them if they could tell me when the B-52s were given to the Marine Corps. But that's another story. I got lost. Where are we at now?
Okay, so So you're in Nampong, Thailand for your
Yes.
second tour, and it had a nickname. You want to tell us a little bit about how it got
Oh, the
its
Rose
nickname?
Garden,
The
yes, yeah. That was, we didn't promise you a rose garden, and boy, that was the epitome of whatever that song or that saying meant. It was, we had, you can't complain about it. We had sea rations for the first 3 or 4 months, but, you know, it's still better than being in the infantry sitting out in a foxhole. And security, I don't know the ins and outs of everything, but we didn't have any internal security in the Marine Air Wing for something like that. And at times, with no status of force, they didn't want us to bring any security in. So they expanded the Marine Air Base Squadron. They call it MABS. It was MABS 15 there, or 13. And this was called Task Force Delta, the whole place over there. And they brought an infantry company at least down, and they provided the security for us, and they had whatever they did the whole way around the airfield there. But I was always under the impression that there weren't enough people to really provide adequate security. There were no fences, there was no road or anything to move around on a Jeep, and it would have been a great opportunity for a couple North Vietnamese sappers to come in with explosives. They could have blown everything up, I think. And they just never did. And our admin officer, I was in the admin section again, and we were probably a couple hundred yards north of the runway, and right across the street from us was the security headquarters. And Peter Pace was one of the lieutenants, or maybe a young captain. He was assigned there, which is, I never met him or anything else. It's just I found out later he'd been in Nampong. That was cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You know, I wish I'd have met him. But at least once a month you'd hear a round go off. They had a lot of accidental discharges there because it got boring over there, and people just to try and keep them excited about what they were doing. Keep the morale up. That was difficult for our guys. They were working 18-hour days a lot of times, and they had access to a lot of drugs. The Thais would go through and just give them marijuana cigarettes laced with heroin, and we had a lot of kids get in trouble over that. And the skipper, he required the guys and the parachute riggers and the people that worked on the ejection seats, they had to take a urine test every week. Okay. And the rest of the guys, it was, you know, there's no way you're going to stop it. And it was tough. And I saw, we moved over in June, they didn't have a club for the troops till October. So, you know.
It's rudimentary conditions.
They had, you know, what did they do in their spare time if they had any spare time? It was a tough life for them, but they, as typical Marines, they made the best of it. And they survived it. But when I got back to the States, a number of kids had come out. Oh, you were in Nampong, weren't you? Yeah. Hey, weren't you a sergeant? You know, he's a corporal now. Drugs, you know, a lot of them, we didn't have a good rehabilitation program for them, and that I wish would have done a lot more for them, but it was still a new thing. The Marine Corps didn't know how to handle it, and there was so much drugs in Vietnam, and even more so in Thailand.
So how many flights did you? So for putting your two tours together. How many flights did you total?
441.
441. Wow! Yeah. Thank you.
It's just a number.
Well, it's an amazing number looking back, I'm sure.
We had a guy, Little John Cummings, another naval flight officer. He's the only NFO. He was with another guy named Tom Lassiter. They were assigned to one of the squadrons that was actually working right at the end of the war off a carrier up near the DMZ. They actually shot down a MiG. And he ended up with something like 700 missions. But he had 3 tours. I don't think he's married. All he did was fly. But he set the example for all of us. Really.
Well, I'm sure Chris and the family were happy to have you back.
I was happy to be back. Yes.
So after your second tour in Vietnam, what did you do from there?
I was lucky enough, well, it's the same thing. Once you've been in the Marine Corps long enough, you know how to work the system. So I went back to Yuma as an instructor at Yuma. I stayed in 101 for a month or two, and then they sent me to safety school, became an aviation safety officer, and they moved me up the group to be the safety officer for the whole group. And I did that for a couple months and got my master's degree while I was there. Spent 16 months going to Pepperdine, had a remote class down there, which was interesting, very good. That was something that I was fortunate enough that they allowed the veterans. It was an extra benefit for having been in the war, I think. So that was a nice reward.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
got orders up to VX4, and you heard me say the name Vic Rosillo again. VX4 has a Marine pilot and a Marine Naval Flight Officer up there. It's a Naval Fighter Weapons Test Squadron up at Point Magoo, and Vic Rosillo was the Marine NFO. So between talking to him and talking to the right people, I was his replacement. So I went up there in December, I guess, of whatever I said. December or January?
76, does that sound right?
76.
Okay.
And
Moved to California.
went to California, and I used to be a coin collector, collecting mint errors, things that are wrong with coins. And one of the major dealers lived in Thousand Oaks, which is right next to Point Magoo. So I knew him, and he took me around and looking at houses. And we bought a brand new house up there. And he had lived there for 15 years. He sold his house and bought the house across the street from us, which was sort of cool. But that was up in Thousand Oaks, and everybody else stayed in Oxnard or Camarillo. But, I knew somebody, so we moved up there, and we got the house. And the neat thing about it, it wasn't finished. When we got up there, we had a 21-foot motorhome, and the house was ready for us to move into, but the city would not let us occupy the house until the grass grew. This is Thousand Oaks, is a strange city, as you know. The grass had to be up at a certain height or something, and so we spent about 2 months living. They had facilities down on the beach at Point Magoo, trailer facilities. So we just lived on the beach, and Chris lived in the motorhome. We had a Volkswagen Thing was our other transportation, and she ran the kids up to school so that they were going to the same school they'd be going to, and the duty officer would come down and pick me up and bring me home every day. That was sort of neat. But VX4 was, got to tell you the one story that made a big impression on me, that I checked in on a Friday, and it says, quarters, 8 o'clock Monday, full uniform, and okay, and saw Vic, and that was neat. And I showed up Monday morning and went down and fell in with I knew a few of the people there, but I guess 8 o'clock, about 10 minutes of 8, the XO comes in, they call the squadron to attention, they take roll call like any other organization does, and a couple minutes before 8 o'clock, we're sitting inside the hangar, and the hangar faces runway 927, and if you look across the runway, you can see the flagpole from the main headquarters at Point Magoo, and you could watch them raise the flag in the morning. So our commanding officer, he's a Navy captain. This is a fighter test squadron, and for a little authority, instead of normally a squadron in the Navy is commanded by a commander. He's an 06 captain because he needs some rank so he can say, hey, this is right or wrong, and they're evaluating things, and they want to say, they want to have enough influence where what they say is taken as that's the way it is. But anyway, he comes down and salutes the XO and turns around and faces the squadron, and About that time, you hear something, and they start playing to the colors, raising the flag. He says, "Squadron attention, what? Hand salute." And everybody salutes. He turns around and salutes. They raise the flag. And I'm sitting there going, what is going on here? I mean, commanding officer, he salutes for everybody. Everybody stands at attention. Everybody doesn't salute. What's going on? It's candid camera or something here. So afterwards, we're going up the steps. I said, what was that all about? He said, oh, you don't know. Captain Frank, he's a POW for 6 years.
Oh,
We all salute.
yeah,
That was good.
that is good.
So VX4 was probably one of the highlights of my career. I was a Marine. They just got a program in to upgrade the RF4, which is reconnaissance F4. They're putting a new infrared and a new radar system in it. And no one in VX4, they're fighter people. They don't know anything about reconnaissance. So he says, that'll be your program. And so I don't know anything about reconnaissance, but I found quickly that VX4, you can write your own ticket. So I wanted to say, hey, the Air Force already has these systems in their RF4s over in Germany. If I went over there and looked at them for about a month, I'd be better versed to handle the program. So I went to Germany for a couple of weeks and saw the RF4, and it was good for me, but it was also nice to go to Germany. And then I don't know what a reconnaissance officer really does. And if I went down to Key West, the Navy, because I want to have a Navy influence on this too, the Navy has the RA-5C, the Vigilante, and no Marines have ever flown in the Vigilante. So if you let me get down there, and they can check me out on what they do and make sure the Navy and the Marine Corps are equally versed in this stuff. So I spent a couple weeks at Key West and flew in the Vigi, and that was neat. Fastest airplane in the Navy at that time. That was worth doing. But I come back and did the program, flying out of El Toro. We had a modified airplane. We went out to the Ranger and did some caracols on it and saw how good the system worked. And the very first flight I made out of El Toro, coming back in, I talked the pilot into doing a high-speed low pass over it. And we did a high-speed low pass, which is, if you saw the movie Top Gun where the guy spills his coffee, I was doing the same thing myself. Wow. And when I land, duty officer comes walking up the airplane and says, when you get changed, the group CO would like to talk to you. I said, oh yeah, that's good. I knew I was in trouble. Anyway, I get out, and the Marines, every time they do a reconnaissance flight, they practice it. As soon as the airplane lands, there's guys there downloading all the film and everything else that you have, and they go in and process it just like that. So I change and get out of my flight suit, put a uniform on, and walking past it, I see doing the infrared, and they're making pictures of it. And I said, whoa, that is really cool, because I knew how good the system was working. And it was called the AAD-5. It's a new reconnaissance system, and it was playing the AAS-18, the old one they had, which was a prototype infrared system, and it prints it on 5-inch film. And this picture, I had him print me probably a 18-inch strip. Wow. It was where the RF-4s were parked. The airplane that I had been in and took this image with, the shadow of that airplane, an hour and a half later, was still there, recognizable that there had been an F4 or an RF4 parked there. Oh, that's how sensitive this system was. It was just staggering, the increase in technology that they'd made. So I says, can I have that picture? And he says, well, it's classified. I says, it's not yet. So he cut it out, and I rolled it up and went up to the group and sat there, and the open group CO will see you now, and he's talking on the phone. So I went in and stood there and some reporting and all this other stuff. And he says, I understand you made a low pass over the field. And I says, yeah, I was testing out this new system to see how good it was. I says, I brought a copy along if you want. And I showed it to him. He says, that's my shadow with the airplane I was in. And his eyes just like, is this classified? I says, not yet. He says, can I have this? I says, yeah. I was dismissed. No problems. That was cool. But it was just a terrific increase in the capability of what the airplane could do. It had a thing, the RF-4 had a thing called photo flash. After they started using the ground-to-air missiles, or over in Vietnam, we started trying to stay above 10,000 feet unless we're doing close air support. And we had devices on either side of the airplane where we could launch chaff or flares, depending if they were shooting at us, we'd launch flares, or maybe we'd launch chaff. The RF-4 had the same thing, and they had what they called photo flash. At night, if they wanted to take photographs, high altitude or low altitude, to pop up these two flares, a giant light would go off, and it was like a flashbulb on a camera.
Wow.
And the only problem with it is you're giving yourself away. They knew you'd do a photo flash here and a photo flash here, and next thing you know, the guy'd be shooting right where you're going, and it wasn't a good idea. With this new infrared system, one of the things I wrote up is you can take those doors out of there. You don't need it anymore. This system at any altitude was superior to anything you could get with photography and a photo flash.
Gosh.
And I don't know if they ever did or not, but it was a neat system.
So Hughes is at Point Magoo while you were there as well.
It's a 2-year tour there,
Okay.
and it's a by name replacement. And my replacement had been named, and about that same time Marine Corps had just switched over to a command select thing. They had a group of people decided who was going to the upper level schools. And I got selected to go to Armed Forces Command and Staff College in Norfolk. And it was a 6-month course, put your stuff in storage, go to 6 months, which we'd moved a dozen times before, and it's a pain in the neck.
Oh, I know.
And I wasn't looking forward to that. And then we're talking, the kids are in school, they're happy doing what they're doing. So I went in and says, I was doing the F-14 TARPs at that time, which the Navy had a reconnaissance program. We didn't talk about that. So once I finished the RF-4, said, hey, we're putting the reconnaissance pod, the Vigi is going out there, retiring them all. We're going to have this TARPS, Tactical Air Reconnaissance. It's going to have a forward and a vertical camera in it for film, and it'll have the AAD-5 for infrared, and they'll hang it in the bottom of the F-14. And it'll be your program. So I went down Patuxent River, flew it a few times back there, and we got our airplane out in Point Magoo probably in 1978, early 79, and started flying it. And the very first flight we had, the squadron had deployed up to Fallon, Nevada, which is a Navy base up in Nevada, and they use that to deploy and do some training stuff. So they had a bunch of fighter squadrons and attack squadrons up there, and they were running a big exercise. And there's a place that you can say this now, I guess, Area 51's up there, and it was very classified at the time to fly over there. It was all top secret briefs to get in there and out of it, but that's where they were flying. And I says, well, why don't we go up there and we'll do the pre-strike assessment of the target, and then we'll do, we weren't bombing anybody, but then we'll fly over after everybody has bombed it, and we'll do the post-flight assessment. So they says, yeah, we'll clear you to do that, even in the thing, because in Area 51 at the time, there was a number of programs going on that were all classified, might still be, I don't know. But everything, as soon as you're done doing what you're doing, the airplanes would go in a hangar. There were hangars everywhere. Nothing was left outside very often, very long. So we went up and we did a couple missions, and what they did is, I says, okay, you two guys, Navy guys, developing the film for you. They had top secret clearances. We'll let you develop the film once a week, and then we'll send two guys over from Area 51 to watch and see what you have on there, so that there's nothing classified, and then you can have the film to do what you're doing to assess it as far as the quality of the tarps pod. So the first week we did this thing, and they're developing the WAD5 film, and as you can well guess, they're looking at it, and our two photo mates that are developing this thing, they stop it and they says, "Isn't this a MiG something? And here's the shadows of the airplanes that had been parked out there." They could identify what was up there, and nobody knew that this capability existed. And I says, "If we have it, you know they have it, and they have it in the satellites and everything else." And man, it just, I don't know whatever happened to that knowledge, but I think it changed a lot of the techniques up in Area 51 just based on the fact that, oh wow, look at this. So that was sort of cool.
That is cool.
That was cool. Anyway, I come back and got selected again to go to the school, and I got selected for lieutenant colonel. Found out that if I accepted that, I'd have to go to the school and I'd have a 3-year obligation. And we talked, and they says, "I think I'm going to retire, so my replacement, come on up." And they sent me over to Marine Air Detachment. There's a MAD on the base, and they said, "You go over there, the CO's leaving, they'll make you the XO, and until the new colonel comes in, you can be there." So I went over there and started flying with Pacific Missile Test Center. They had a, whatever they flew, it was, I still flew with VX4 a few times, but I flew with Pacific Missile Test Center, and Hughes Aircraft Company was there, and they had a couple F-14s bailed to them that they used. They were doing missile improvement and radar improvement using the F-14. So I was flying with some Hughes pilots, and our chief pilot, a guy named Bill Jessup, he's dead now, but God bless him, he came over and says, "I understand you're getting ready to retire and move." He says, "Hand me a 3x5 card with a number on it." He says, "Why don't you just stay here?" I said, "Whoa." Well, yeah, that was cool. So I decided, yeah, I am going to retire. So I retired out of there in March. I don't know if it was the 28th of February or the 1st of March, whatever, somewhere around then I retired and started flying with Hughes. And that was, I'd fly 2 or 3 times a week. They had A3s with F-14 nose on the front of an A3. And same thing for their F-14s. But it wasn't a very, the VX-4 you'd fly every day, twice a day sometimes. There, if I flew 2 or 3 times a week, there were 3 NFOs and 4 or 5 pilots. And nothing against Hughes, but that's as often as they could fly. The development of improving the technology, they'd fly, find out a problem. Guys would write new software, change something, test it in the lab, and then test it in the airplane, and that's when would fly it. So there wasn't a big, heavy flight schedule. And I got bored in a week or two, and the engineering department was really down at...
Beach now?
No, it's not Long Beach. It's just north of the LA airport. Anyway,
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It had their own airport there. The whole company was there.
Right.
But they had radar systems and electro-optics were in engineering skyscrapers down the other side of the airport, Culver City.
Culver City. Sorry.
I'm feeling better now as memory comes back. It just takes a while for the computer to drift through there. Anyway, I go out and talk to Ed Andrews, who was head of the engineering department, and he said, "Oh, you're a flight test engineer, but you have a master's degree and a degree in electrical engineering." He says, anyway, he worked a thing that he is going to promote me to an engineer, and the company says you can't increase pay that much. And he's figured out a way to do it, so we did. So they did that, and about that time they were moving over to Van Nuys, so I was part of the cadre that opened up moving the whole flight test operation to Van Nuys. But I did a program down there called PLARS, where they put a position locating reporting system, which was a prototype for the Marines to know where everybody in an infantry unit was, so that they knew where they were. And I used to wonder that during World War II in Korea, a lot of good things happened, a lot of bad things happened because they thought they knew where they were or where the other guy was, and they didn't really know.
Right.
I wondered how much that would really change war if you really know where everybody was, but never found that out. But I did a flight test on all those, and that was sort of cool. They, I can fly. I don't have a pilot's license, but they take me up, and one of the things was in a Huey. We had to go up and fly over Dodger Stadium for about an hour while they checked us, and he'd just say, "Hey, you got it," and let me fly around.
Oh, fun.
You know, and I thought, oh, I wonder what would happen, but I never found out. But I got to fly a lot of airplanes that way, and a lot in them, and actually get to fly them. So that was a neat program.
Oh, nice.
Got to Van Nuys, and eventually got promoted up to manager of the engineering department, and then manager of all the flight test programs. And I did that. Well, I was a manager there for about the last 15 years, and that was nice. And did some really interesting programs that we could talk about, but some of them still aren't around. And I retired in '99, and some of them are flying now. We put the infrared, that helicopter that ran into the C-130 over in Iran a long time ago. We put the FLIR in their airplanes. That was some of the prototype stuff we did. That we had some amazing systems that we put in, and it was interesting the whole time. I just loved managing it and flying it there. To get paid to fly, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Oh, well, we thank you for your service. That's
Well, thank you.
amazing times. Are you, as you're thinking back on your career in the Marine Corps, what's your biggest takeaway? What did your time in the military teach you or leave with you that's resonated with you today?
Well, I could actually give you plenty. We talked about this before, and I've been thinking about it. That there's two aspects of it. The flying part of it, you know. I played with the Boy Scouts for a couple of years. My dad had a heart attack. Can't go to scout meetings anymore. He recovered good, and they started a Civil Air Patrol squadron back in New Cumberland, Pennsylvania, and I got into that and flew a couple times and thought that was neat, and that sort of gave me an introduction to flying. And in flying, that was my career. I really enjoyed doing it. It's not like working in a mine somewhere or doing something that selling real estate or whatever else. I was doing something I really enjoyed doing every day. And the programs were fascinating. That, you know, some of the advanced stuff that was coming down the pike and the people we were working with, I enjoyed the flying, and it's nice enjoying what you're doing every day, going to work, and that was nice. And as far as the Marine Corps, that got me started. We talked about it, and I'm wearing the hat. It doesn't say anything on it, but you have hats that say the few and the proud. That is the Marines. The Marines are sort of special in a way that once a Marine, always a Marine, and that's, you know, they say, wow, he's an ex-Marine. Lee Harvey is an ex-Marine maybe, but there's only a few of them that would rather not be associated with the Marine Corps. Once you're a Marine, you're always a Marine, and this Semper Fidelis, you're always faithful. They actually tear you down and build you back up and make you a Marine, and it's a special thing that no matter where you're at, we take a couple cruises, somebody else has a Marine hat on, Semper Fidelis, anytime, just like that. It's a lifetime obligation, and it changes you for life, and I think it makes you a better person. And for me, if you've been in aviation long enough, you're bound to collect a whole box of patches, and I had one of those boxes. When I got in Marine Corps League, they have a thing called Devil Dogs, which is an affiliated organization within the Marine Corps League, and they wear vests that display a lot of who they were and where they were and what they did while they were in the Marine Corps. So I decided I'll put all these on one of these vests, and this is my life in the Marine Corps as I started flying. This is VMFA 251, my first squadron. Went from there to VMFA 542, the tires, best squadron in the Marine Corps. Came back and went down to the training command somewhere, VT 10, VNAO school. Went from there to amphibious warfare school, which is an amphibious warfare school, and I don't care about the patch, but went from there out to 101, which is the F4 training squadron. I was a Phantom Ferret back seat. They had Phantom Flyers and Phantom Ferrets in the back seat of the F4. It must be on the other side. There's an F4 particular patch. Anyway, went from there overseas, got into 115, was the 2nd Combat Squadron. From there came back to 101, and went up to VX4, and from VX4 went over to, well, while I was there I did the TARPS program and the RF4 sensor upgrade and refurbishment program, and then the rest of them are just a bunch of other patches from Point Magoo, different carriers I've been on, and it's my history in the Marine Corps in patch format.
Nice.
Okay, you want me to do the other side?
Yeah.
This is military order the Devil Dogs. This is a Grumman F-14 Tomcat patch. The Marines were buying the F-14s when General Wilson became commandant. Just before we accepted delivery of our first F-14s, he decided we needed fighters and bombers. We didn't need interceptors, so he canceled the program. So these Grumman had made models. When I first flew it, they give you a model. I have a Marine F-14 model, but I have Marine F-14 patches. These are very hard to get. This was Nampong. That's the Rose Garden. This Grumman put out patches flying it from 100, 200, 300, 400 missions. I never made 500. F-14 patch. The original McDonnell Douglas F-4 patch. 2,000 hours in the F-4. This is the Marine Corps' equivalent of Top Gun that started up at El Toro. And then just some of the air groups that I was in. And air groups are just the next higher echelon organization above the squadron, and above them is the aircraft wings, which you'll see a lot of people that just have a wing, 3rd Marine aircraft wing patch on, like my hat. That's a Marine aircraft wing patch, and squadrons are where the action goes on. So that's what I got on here. And there's a couple retirement pins, and that's it.
Excellent.
I was a sergeant at one time.
All right.
And I was a major.
Yeah.
I'm still a major, but I've never been a sergeant major, which would probably get a better job. The end. As I retired, I decided my son was just old enough to get into scouting, and I got into scouting, and I've been in scouting ever since. And as I evolved through it and got associated where I could make some decisions for the Ventura County Council and help out. I got I used to ace spelunker in high school. I rock climbed a lot, and I teach rock climbing for the Boy Scout adults. I have for a long time on a national level for the Western region. I go anywhere from Texas over. I haven't gone to Japan yet, but that's part of my region, and I just gave it over to the guy that used to help me. And in doing so, I also got involved at our summer camp. We built a 57-foot tower up there, a climbing tower, and that's my tower. And ran the tower for a number of years as a volunteer during the summer, running it for summer camp, and really enjoyed doing that. And as I was up at summer camp, they made me, for a while, the council camping chair. And the camping chair just runs a committee. But I volunteered up there, and I guess somebody thought I was in charge of a lot of stuff, and I was in charge of nothing. I mean, the camp director's in charge of it, but I got up there, and they used to have 3 campfires. The first campfire would be Sunday. They'd go in Saturday. The first campfire Sunday night the staff would put on, and then Tuesday or so the combined campfire where the staff would help the scouts put on a campfire, and then the last one the scouts would put it on. And I says, why don't you make that the second one? The last one I'm changing. It's going to be a patriotic campfire. We have the same fort they have down in Disneyland. They have a copy of that fort up at our camp. And we have our final campfire up there. It's a patriotic campfire. And the staff does patriotic things, the songs, the Star Spangled Banner. They talk about the Pledge of Allegiance, all this sort of stuff. And then they retire a flag. Mm. And there's a story that John McCain has talked about and stuff. But there was a POW that while he was captured, he made himself a needle, found some thread, sewed an American flag into the back of his shirt, and when he was done, held it up, and everybody said the Pledge of Allegiance. And every day they would do that. And about sometime shortly after he made it, they come in and inspect the stuff, and they found his flag, and they watched him as he took the flag and walked away. That night they came and got him, and they beat him up a lot and threw him back into the building. And this was up at the Hanoi Hilton. There were John McCain and a bunch of people. There were about 40 guys in there. And they nursed him back to health, and within a day or two they looked back and he's sitting back there making another flag.
Yeah.
And just trying to feed patriotism into these. Somehow I didn't think the kids today have a patriotic life or attitude as much as I really wish they would. And in the morning I says, hey, we're going to start. One day I would play Red Scout and sing the Pledge of Allegiance and explaining it, or John Wayne doing the Scout Law, or I'd play the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing the Star Spangled Banner to raise the flag, and saying, if they're getting it home, great, that's great, but if they're not, I'm going to feed them one way or the other. And I quit going up there probably 2008, and started doing some other stuff. And last year, the climbing director couldn't make it for 2 weeks, and we ran the tower again, and I found out they're still doing the patriotic campfire.
And rightly cool. So.
Yes.
It's a wonderful tradition you started.
Yeah. But along with that, I got 2 years, leaving the house. Where are you going? You're going camping again? I said, whoa, yeah. My wife, she's had an Explorer Post, a Venture Crew. She's going back to the Jamboree 4 times on staff at the Jamboree. I've taken the Ventura County troop back to the National Jamboree 5 times and got her involved in scouting too, so it was a family thing, and it was good for us. I liked it.
Do you want to share a little bit about your POW bracelet? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I might still get a little upset, but
that's okay.
This picture I showed, if you can see it. Where's your camera there? This picture is 8 of us. They come in on Tuesday and posted a top secret message in the ops office over in Thailand saying the war will be over at 5 o'clock on Friday. And that's give or take, depending on the time zone. It could have been anything, but sometime around 5 o'clock. That's what we understood. It was 5 o'clock the coming Friday. Are we going to fly Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Yeah. Why? Nobody knew. But that's our job, and that's what we're going to do. So we had a 4-plane, and we loaded up Friday afternoon, took off, and went up and just whatever our target was, we dropped our bombs. It didn't change the war at all. We didn't get shot at. But coming home at about 10 minutes of 5 on guard channel, 243.0 on UHF, it's the emergency frequency. When somebody broadcasts on that frequency, everybody that's within receiving range will hear it. And F4 just got shot down right at the DMZ. 2 forward air controllers went in to try and help him. Both of them had two people in the airplane. Both were shot down. One of them, both people in the airplane were killed. The other, they were captured and repatriated in March. The F-4, both crew members ejected. The backseater, a guy named Al Kinsler, who died a few years ago, he was in VX-4 when I was in there, and he's the one that told me a lot of what happened. He watched the pilot get captured, and the pilot's name was Harley Hall. Harley had been flight leader of the Blue Angels. Everybody knows that. I think he was the XO of the F-143 off the carrier, due to take command the next day, or maybe they just made him. But they captured him, and they never released him, and I've worn this for 40 years. Just as a reminder that when all the smoke cleared, when I came back, I bought the Time Life series on the Vietnam War, and opened it up to chapter 1, and they talk about the Tonkin Gulf incident, and they say there's the high 90% that never happened. That Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense at that time, just elaborated it, misinformed President Johnson about some things, or made a commitment to something that there was a lot more politics involved with the war than there was as far as saving Vietnam or stopping the spread of communism or whatever. And when the Pentagon Papers come out, they sort of verified the fact that there was a lot more politics involved for the last 30 years in our government than there should have been. That there was a lot of lying to the people, and the 58,000 people that lost their lives in Vietnam, they did it for a good cause, what they thought was a good cause, but it didn't really change a lot of things. And we're doing it now in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and you know, that's been going on for thousands of years over there, and we're not going to change that either. So it's politics. I'm not a politician. I served my country flying, and that's what I did. I wish the politicians would serve the country a little better.
Well, we thank you for your service and your time that you put in.